Hello everyone, this is Dr. Vishal Trivedi from Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Guwahati. And what we were discussing about the living organisms in this course. And so far what we have discussed about the evolutions, and we have discussed about the classifications of the animals. And so far what we have discussed about on what basis the animals are or the organisms are being classified. And then we have also discussed about the different types of the criteria through which the scientists have actually classified the animals, right? So they have in our previous lecture we discussed about that how the animals are being classified into the starting from the porifera, coelenterata, and then we have also discussed about the platyhelminthes, escahelminthes, mollusca, uh, and then ultimately we also discuss about the phylum chordata. And within the phylum chordata, also based on the different types of properties and different types of similarity and the dissimilarities, the chordatas are also further divided into the many subclasses, right, or subdivisions. So the idea of that discussion was that we would like to say that how the similarity and the dissimilarity between the different organisms could be a basis for the classifications. To understand that same process, we are actually now going to discuss about the classifications of the plants. This is not an extensive or exhaustive discussion about the plant classifications. The purpose of this discussion is that we would like to emphasize how the classification actually works, right? And that's how we have taken an example of the two different divisions, right? We have taken a kingdom Animalia, and how the kingdom Animalia is being divided, and now we are going to take up the kingdom Plantae. So initially, if you recall, we have discussed that and organisms are being divided into the five kingdoms. We have said about the Monera, right? So we have discussed about the Monera. We discussed about the Protista, fungi, plantae, and the animal. And in the previous lectures, we were discussing about the animalia, like the animals such as the elephants, what you see here, right? And now in today's lecture, we are going to discuss about how the people have used the different criteria to classify the plants. But before we get into the details of the plants, let's discuss about the different parts of the plant and how they are actually being formed. So if you see the plant, what you see here is they have a very well defined structures or the anatomy. So starting from the bottom, right? So you know that the plants are present into the soil. They could be present in the aquatic plants. They could be terrestrial plants, right? And they are present in the soil. And within the soil, they have a well-defined vascular system, right? So that vascular system is made up of the roots. The purpose of the root is that they are actually going to suck the nutrients from the soil. So they are going to suck the nutrients from the soil, and they are also going to suck the water, right? So they are going to suck the water, nutrients. They are also going to suck the minerals and all other kind of things, right? So that material will actually going to travel all the way up to the top, and the portion what is going to help in terms of the supplying the food material to the different parts of the body is actually being the part of the stem. So stem is actually the woody part which is being present into the plants, right? And their job is that they will be help in uh, supplying the food or supplying the water, right, to the different parts of the bud. So stem is nothing but a pipe-like structure. So that is actually going to supply the food or to the water to the different parts. And then we have the leaves which are attached to the plants, right? And the leaves are actually green in color, right? You know that the leaf is green in color, and it is green because it has a pigment which is called as the chlorophyll. And the leaves are also called as the kitchen of the plant, right? So here the food is going to be prepared, and how the food is going to be prepared, remember that food is going to be prepared by a process where it is going to utilize the light or the energy from the sun, and it is actually going to prepare the food by the process which is called as the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a very complex process where you have the two phases. You have a light phase and you have a dark phase, and the light phase is actually going to be utilized for capturing the sunlight from the sun, so that it actually be able to capture the energy, and that's how it is actually going to produce the NAD and the NADPH, ATP and the NADPH, whereas the ATP and NADPH are going to be used in the dark reactions, and in the dark reaction it is actually going to take up the carbon dioxide from the environment, and that's how it is actually going to produce the food. So if you see the typical reactions, what is going to happen when you are going to have the photosynthesis is that it's going to take up the carbon dioxide, it is going to take the water from the roots, right, and then it is actually going to generate the sugar in the presence of the sunlight. Now once the leaf is going to produce the food, that food is going to be distributed to the roots, to the stem, and to the flower also. So on top of this you are going to have the flowers. So flowers are actually the sex organs of the plant, right? uh, Not that all the plants are going to have the flowers, but these are the few typical parts which are present in a typical plant, right? So flowers are actually of the sex organs, and plant could be of the either the separate male and female plant, or it could be a bisexual plants. So it can be a male flower or it could be a female flower, and they will be together. So male is actually going to produce the pollen grain, and the female is actually going to have the gynosium or the ovary, and that's how they are actually going to participate into the fertilizations, and that's how the flower is going to give rise to the offspring. So it's going to form the seeds. Then apart from that, it also could have the fruits. I think if you remember, the fruits are actually being material where you are actually going to have the seed, and the seed is actually going to be covered by the food material. So that is actually been a way to protect the seeds, so that the seeds are actually going to be dispersed for a very long period. And in by taking the nutrition, because the food is there right outside this seed, the seed is also going to be dispersed out beyond the original location of this particular plant. So now let's talk about, so based on this kind of anatomical features or external features, the seed, the flower, the plants are being divided based on the two factors. One, the plants which do not have the fruits, or the plants which do not have the flowers, or the plants which do have the flowers, because this is the one which makes a very clear distinction between the two groups. So what you have done is the people have divided the plant kingdom into the two groups. One, the plants which do not have the flower or the non-flowering plant, and the other group is called as the flowering plants. Within the non-flowering plant, we have the many classes, and the non-flowering class also we have the few classes. So within the non-flowering plants, we have the two classes. One is called as the mosses, the other one is called as the fern. They do not produce the flowers, okay, which means they are actually going to have the reproduction by the other means. Now this is the spore forming capsule. So what you see here is a typical moss, and what you see here is actually a spore forming capsule. So in this capsule you have the spores which are stored, right, and the spores are getting, when the spores are being stored in this particular organ, right, and once there will be suitable weather, the spores are actually going to be dispersed, and that's how these spores will fall onto the distant locations, and that's how they are going to give rise to the new plants. What are the characteristics of mosses? The characteristics of mosses is that they are actually the simplest plant. They actually do not have the flowers. They do not have the very well developed vascular tissues, which means they do not have the roots, and as well as they do not have the very well developed vascular tissues. They have a very simple stem and the leaves, and they have the rhizoids for the anchorage, which means they have the rhizoids, right? Like root like structure, but it's not a well developed or true root actually. So only for anchorage purposes. Then it is forming the spores, and the spores are then going to be dispersed by the wind. These are the damp terrestrial lands. So they are being formed in the places where you have the large quantity of water, but they are not the aquatic plants. So what you see here is rhizoids, which actually helps to hold these plants into the soil. Then it has a midrib. So within the leaves, you see leaf has a blade, and it also has a midrib. Then it has a female rosettes, and these female rosettes are actually going to produce the spores. Now let's talk about the ferns. So ferns are actually you might have seen the fern in your home, right? So ferns are actually having the rhizome, which actually are going to be present into the soil, and the rhizome has the roots. So the clear-cut distinction between the mosses and the fern is that the mosses does not contain the roots, right, the well developed root, whereas the ferns are actually containing the roots, and then it has the leaves or the pinnacles, and these are actually being utilized for the photosynthesis. And within the fern you have the spore forming units. The spore forming units are present onto the back side of the leaves, and that's how they are actually going to form the spores. These spore forming units are called as polypodium, right? Uh, what are the characteristics of the fern? They are having a well developed root and the feathery leaves and the underground stems. They have the vascular tissues for the transport and the support of the animal plants. They are spore producing organs on the underside of the leaf, and they are actually going to be formed in the damp and the shady places. So this is all about the classification and the discussion about the plants which are being non-flower farming plants. Then we are going to discuss about the flowering plants. So within the flowering plants, you can have the two subclasses. One is called as the Gymnosperms, and the other one is called as the Angiosperms. So Gymnosperms are they are actually going to contain the roots, stems and leaves, and they are going to have the vascular tissues, and then they are going to have the flowers as well as the fruit, which actually will contain the seeds. Um, so in the angiosperm again can be classified into two classes. One is called as the monocot and the other one is called as the dicot. Now let's see the characteristics of the gymnosperms. They are the tall evergreen trees. They have the well developed root and the woody stems. They have the needle shaped leaves. They have the vascular tissue which they use for the transportations. Then they have the cones with the reproductive structures, and then they have the naked seeds in the female cones. So they have the seeds but they don't have the fruits, and then they are found into the dry places. Now let's talk about the another class which is called as the angiosperms. So angiosperm, as I said, angiosperm can be further divided onto the based on the type of the seeds. So it could be a monocot or the monocotyledon plant or the dicot or the dicotyledon plants. So what is the characteristics of the monocotyledon plants? So monocotyledon plants are actually going to contain the seeds which are actually going to have the one leaf, okay, and the leaves have parallel veins, and it are herbaceous plants, For example, the grass and the maize. So you can just remember by what is the monocot. All the food grains in general are actually belonging to the monocot, because the food grains are and monocots are having a very unique and leaves anatomy, and because of that they are actually running a C4 cycle of the dark reactions, and because of that their food production is more, because the C4 cycle is much more efficient compared to the C3 cycle. So what you see here is a typical seed. When you grow the seeds, what you see here is the embryonic leaf. So it has only one leaf, that's why this is called as a monocot, and it has one cotyledon, right? And what you see here is this is the complete fruit. So it has a fruit tissue, seed coat, endosperms, and the embryonic shoots and the embryonic root. So when you grow them, it is actually going to give rise to the new plants. Then we are going to talk about the dicot. So dicot is this is the evergreen plant what you have seen, right? And this is the what you see here is the veins into the leaves. So they are actually arranged in a typical pattern, and the dicots are going to have the two leaves into the seed, and the leaves have the veins in their network. These examples are trees and sunflowers and rose. And what you see here is actually the two cotyledons. So what you see here is this is a seed coat, right? And it has the two cotyledons. So it has the two cotyledons, right? One cotyledon and two cotyledon. If you want to, see very carefully about the dicot plants and understand what is the dicot and what is the monocot and what is the cotyledons. What you can do is just take the gram seed, okay, and soak it into the water, okay, for maybe like 24 hours, okay, in a warm weather. What you will see is that the have you seen the gram, like it's like this, right? Okay, so if you grow them, it's actually going to show you the two cotyledons. So it is actually going to those fleshy things what you see, and that is what actually called as cotyledons, right? And then it's actually going to have the embryonic stem or the embryonic shoots, and then it also has the embryonic root and embryonic leaves, and it also has the seed coat which actually get dissolved when you put them into the water. So let's take a look at the plant classifications. So plants are actually being classified based on whether the flower is absent or whether the flower is present. So initially you have the non-flower spore bearing plants or the flowering plants. Non-flowering spore bearing plants can be further classified based on whether they have the root or they don't have the roots. So if they don't have the root, then you have an example of mosses. If they have the root, then they are being classified as the ferns. Similarly, in the case of flowering plants, they can be further divided whether it contains the fruits or not. So because if they don't have the fruits, then it is actually going to have the naked seed, which is actually present in the gymnosperm. But they have the fruits, which means they are going to have the fruit so that it can cover the seeds. Then it is going to be called as the angiosperm. And the angiosperm can be one leaf plant or the two leaf plant. So if it is a one leaf plant, then it is going to be called as monocot. If it is a two leaf plant, then it is going to be called as dicot. So based on this classification, very carefully you can see that the monocots are actually the most advanced and most developed plants which are present. So with this, we have completed our discussion about the animal organisms, as well as we have talked about the classifications. And I hope you could have understood the many aspects related to the classifications. You might have understood the basis on which you can be able to do the classifications of the different organisms. Although we have just discussed about the animal classification and the plant classification to give you an idea how the classification could have been working and how the people are actually classifying the different types of animals. But you can actually be able to utilize the similar kind of criteria and similar kinds of properties even to classify the bacterial species. You can actually use that to classify the fungi, and you can also classify the same way to the other organisms which are present in the other kingdoms as well. So with this, I would like to conclude my lecture here. In our subsequent lecture, we are going to discuss some more properties related to the living organisms in this course. Thank you.